Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. We are speaking today with Jim Davies. Jim Davies is a neighbor of mine, close friend of ours. To give you a little bit of background, Jim has graduated from Evangel College and University with a math major and a physics minor. Jim has spent several years in the Army and served as the Battalion Fire Direction Center Section Chief. I know that in our discussions with Jim that he had also spent time as chaplain's aide. Jim spent most of his career in information technologies, managing computer departments at universities as well as other organizations. Jim has been fortunate enough to turn his lifelong woodworking hobby into a viable home business where he builds things such as book holders as well as team building tools that you might see at schools and universities. Some of those things are going to be those board platforms where you get 4 or 5 people on sections of wood and then they all have to work together to cover a certain distance. And one of the things, too, that Jim does very well is having neighborhood kids that live close by, come over and work with him, learn valuable woodworking tools, and just life lessons in general. Jim has had different waves of kids that have come through his shop, and at this point, Jim is, I would say, a multi-generational mentor and even surrogate grandfather to some of these kids. A number of the young men that have come through are now having families of their own and stay in contact with Jim. And Jim continues to provide valuable guidance and mentorship to those individuals. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with our conversation with Jim. Hi, Jim, and thank you for joining me with this conversation this evening. We'll go through and start talking a little bit about, we've got Minnie's joining us too, so if you're hearing some clicky-clack, that's the beagle in the background, not a big deal. What I wanted to do is start talking a little bit about the history that you've had with working with the youth, your experiences with becoming a mentor and a multi-generational mentor too. A lot of us that work with Boy Scouts or church groups and things like that, sometimes you see the kids for a couple of years, you work with them, and then they're gone. But you have a unique case where you've worked with kids, and then now those kids are having kids, and you're active and involved in their lives as well. So why don't you start talking a little bit about that experience?
Okay. I've been involved with kids, I guess, forever. Interestingly, in high school, as a senior, I had a 4-year-old class for Sunday school. Had to be unusual.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Get some interesting questions from them, too. Sometimes they're 4 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Like, teacher, did brown cows get brown milk? No, not really. Then I guess moving on, of course, college, no kids around there, but in the military, we had a family coming in to one of the programs we had in the chapel with an 18-year-old, not an 18-year-old, an 18-month-old kid, and he and I got along just fine. Then I got out and, got a career and hire different people for the computer departments, and they would have kids. And
sure,
we had students from all over the world. Most of them were missionary kids or preachers' kids or just ordinary kids. So they didn't have family around, so all of us employees would kind of become family.
Right.
And so I babysit some of them and all that kind of stuff. Moving on, after an information technology career, I've cut wood since I was a kid, made things out of plywood and that kind of thing, and started building a business, and all the neighborhood kids would come by looking for something to do. I never went looking for them, but they came looking for me. And, hey, you got something I can do? Give them $1, and they're happy to come.
Oh, yeah.
So over the years, there have been untold number of kids going through, now my shop. Yep. Prior to that, with church, I had a family here I hired their 17-year-old son to train for a computer operator in Missouri. Moved here, and they had at that time, Chris was 11, I guess, And the preacher was always looking for help in the youth group, and he kept looking at me and said, "You need to get into this." And I said, I don't think so. Finally, I relented.
Yeah.
First thing that we did, that was in November, we went on a camping trip to Stone Mountain. It got down to 32 degrees that night.
Wow. Wow. Now, and 32 isn't that big of a deal when you're in upstate New York or Pennsylvania in
Or in the
December.
military.
Right. But 32 in Georgia that might as well have be North Pole territory for down here.
I still remind him of that. It was cold.
Yeah. Oh boy. So I know, when we moved into the neighborhood and just up the street from you, it seemed like I think my kids were maybe the second wave to come through, or that were working in the shop with
I would
you.
say so.
And so it was, it was great. To your point, I think the kids started looking around and were like, "Hey, what's going on over here?" And RJ, my son, came down and started working with you on the shop. And then over the years, as he's grown and matured and moved out and things like that, now he's got his family going. And even almost maybe the third wave of kids have come through, and a lot of them have started their families as well.
Yeah, I teased the ones that worked in the shop. They came. There's a family up the street that had 9 kids, 7 boys.
Oh, wow.
And the oldest boy, when he was 16, put a flyer in the mailbox to cut grass.
Sure.
And at that point, the shop wasn't doing as much as it is now. But I could have used some help, so I wondered who it was, and I called them up, and their mom answered. Had a long conversation, and she said, well, I have a 14-year-old boy, too, and he's a good worker. So they both came down. I had to meet, the family, and I wanted them to meet us and see the shop first, of course. And since that time, when one of the boys would get old enough to have a real job, the next one would come down and say, "You tell Mr. Jim I can come." So that I've gone through 6 of them now, and 7th one probably be here a little bit, but not as much as the other ones.
Right.
So yeah, those kids, the one that was 16 is now 30, and the other boys, the top 5 are married. And I guess 3 of them have kids, boys and girls. So I guess the youngest of those, or the oldest of those, is now 3, maybe 4. So yeah, I tease them that, start having these kids. I need help in the shop.
Yeah, you got to get waves probably 5, 6, and 7 lined up.
Yeah, one of the boys has gotten into the foster care, and he now has a 7-year-old. So I bought him a tool belt with some tools, and he came the other day with that tool belt on.
Oh wow!
I think I'm about ready to get with him again and make a little tool chest, toolbox, carry box for him. We'll see how soon that gets done, but yeah, lots of kids around.
Well, and that's an interesting aspect too. I mean, there's a whole different component, especially when it's foster children that are brought into the mix. Sometimes you don't know how long they're going to be with the foster parents, and then also too is how that interaction goes. I'm assuming, just knowing you, that it was just, okay, here's a little kid, and we're just going to talk and share and get along.
Well, their foster dad still checks in on me all the time. I mean, all the other boys do too, but that one in particular really takes care of me. I kept teasing him that, he just wants to make sure he's in my will. He says, nope, that's not it. But I happened to be at the house for dinner that night the boy came, and it was quite an emotional thing on my part.
Yeah.
This kid coming in with basically nothing. But, we jumped in, and I've always tried to orient kids to educational stuff, getting them that kind of thing. So, we all got the requisite clothes and that kind of stuff that he needed, for the next day, and got him in school. But also I got him some books on how to get caught up education-wise in first grade.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, between several of us, not just me, but several of us had just taken him under our belt for his support group. And he's just blossoming now, he's just doing great.
How open was he to coming up and meeting you and starting to connect with you? I imagine
that wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
That particular night, there was another foster kid there. Actually, it was their first foster kid, but they knew he was only going to be there for 3 weeks. for medical reasons with his original foster care family. So the foster parents, they were off with the caregiver at the moment. So I was at the table with the two boys, and we had gotten them a plate of food and just wanted to try to make the kid feel at ease, and was talking to him a while and asked him how school was. And he said, well, I don't go to school. And that kind of shocked me quite a bit. So I had already, it was kind of funny for the first original foster kid, I already bought him 2 little trucks. And then I got the call 30 minutes before I left the house that, guess what? We got another kid coming tonight. What do I do? Do I give him one of those 2 trucks, or do I get another one?
Right.
I said, I got those for the first kid. I'll just go to Tractor Supply and get another one. So walking in, I had hid the gifts, the packages, in a little tool shed, or a shed out back. So after we ate, because I didn't want to interrupt him with lunch and dinner or whatever, I said, hey, when I walked in, I saw some packages out there. Let's go see what's there. So we went out to find those things, and they came in and opened those things up, and the rest of it was chaotic.
Sure.
After I left, I was told that the 2 boys were back in the bedroom just having a good time.
Oh,
so I really think it was good and very fortuitous that the first boy was still there to help ease the transition for the second boy.
Second one.
Then the first boy left about 3 or 4 days later, and the second one then was there, and it's all worked out great. It's amazing how well he is doing.
That's great. And how do you think, your interaction with them maybe helped settle the boy in? A lot of times those kids come in, they see the parents, but they don't necessarily get exposed to an older adult or like a grandpa, uncle figure, things like that. So it seemed like immediately he came in, and then boom, here's this extended family that's already there for support and for guidance and love and everything else that's important to a little kid.
Absolutely. We got along from the get-go. I mean, there was no problems that first night. We all interacted, found out he loved to play Uno.
Okay.
Anytime you go over there, you can be expected to play Uno. And then Christmas was like 2 weeks later, and several of us were very concerned that he wouldn't have much for Christmas. Well, there's no need for us to be concerned because he made out like a fat rat. I mean, literally. There was me, everybody at church, and with a family of 9 kids.
Right.
And three sets of grandparents at least, maybe more. He got all kinds of gifts.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe how much he got. He got too much, actually.
Oh,
and not just fun toys either. I mean, he did get toys, but he got clothes and educational things, all of which was needed. So he took to everybody very fast, and everybody just loves the kid. And now watching him grow, and he wants to work.
Right.
Anytime I see a kid that's wanting to work, I can find something for him to do. So when he was here the other day with his foster dad, we found things for him to do.
Sure.
He was happy to do it.
Well, and that, it's important for those kids to feel that sense of belonging, but then also I think too, just speaking from having boys and growing up, that idea of still earning your keep is still something that I think a lot of kids have as they're watching adults and other people work. And some of us lose that a little bit later on. But generally speaking, when you have the little kids, I mean, it goes back to little kids that want to help you paint the house and do different things. Sometimes their helpfulness can add to the work, but in general, that's their way of buying in, I think, into the family or into the organization or the grouping that they're in.
Sure. Well, growing up, and I don't mean this to sound disrespectful to my dad, but he didn't really want us around. He was a mechanic, and I had a little bit of interest, but not really much. But he really didn't want us around when he was working on cars. But we had a neighbor, and any of the kids up on the hill that had a bike and had a problem, we all went to Uncle Boyd, and he fixed their stuff. And he was always patient with us. And as I got to be 10, 11, 12, I would always go down. He would always mess around in the house, fixing this and fixing that, roofing, plumbing, whatever. And so I would go down and get in his way. I mean, we would go down and help him work.
Sure.
That was supposed to be a funny joke, but I kind of messed it up. But I learned so much from him, and just his patience. I think that had a big influence on me on working with kids down the road. Kids can do a whole lot more than we think they can.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. You let them do it. They might not do it right, but get them started. I'm a firm believer in getting the kids involved in stuff around the house. If they have interest, try to foster that interest and develop it for them. Don't just let them sit around playing video games and that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think too is if you don't expect anything from whether it's a grandchild or anybody else, then
if you don't expect anything, you get nothing.
You get nothing.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy looking backwards, whether it's our own lives or history, that when the expectation is high, how much people will rise to the challenge. And it's interesting too that, you had that modeling experience early in your life of a neighbor that was showing the kids how to work on the bikes and how to do things, and just how important that was. And you probably don't even realize when you're that young, and then when you get into your late teens, 20s, 30s, and so on, just, oh yeah, I kind of picked this up and learned this from that person that showed me this. So one of the things talking with other grandpas is that you never know those lessons and those experiences that the kids pick up that carry through to them. I mean, sometimes they're just, I don't know, inconsequential to us. It's just something you do, but it leaves that imprint with the child. So, the foster child is definitely learning a lot, just with the experience being around you.
Well, what's scary when some of those kids later on, you start hearing your phrases and them doing stuff your way. It says, whoa, little big ears really do listen.
Oh, yeah.
And with Uncle Boyd, we moved when I was almost 16 to another state. So I'd only visited him 2 or 3 times after that and went to college and whatever. And so pretty much lost track of him. Then as I became an adult, I so wished I had been able to go back and tell him how much I appreciated what he did for me. Well, he died in 1988, and I didn't even know about it for another 5 years. So there was, no way. I had no contact with the family or anything.
Sure.
And lo and behold, about 5 years ago, something popped up on Facebook, and it ended up being his kid from a second marriage.
Okay.
And so I was able to contact that guy and get back to the family how much I appreciated what Uncle Boyd did. And we still interact on Facebook some.
Sure.
So you never know what you learn and what you pass on to kids or what they're picking up from you.
Right.
Be it good or bad. It better be bad. Better be good.
Right.
Kind of messed that up.
Well, and the other thing too is that role as a mentor and having that experience, you're distant enough where you're not a parent. And we were talking yesterday about the fact where parents can reach out to you, and I've had that experience as a scout leader, and I'm sure other people have too, where it's like, hey, can you talk to so-and-so about X? And you might say the exact same thing as a parent, but it comes across differently.
They hear from someone else that's not the parent, and it does make a difference. That's happened to me too.
Right. Well, and it's funny too, because I even get that from my wife and my wife's friends, where my wife might tell me one thing, and I kind of hear it, but I don't really do much with it. And then a friend of ours says the same thing, and next thing you know, I'm doing whatever that task is, or I'm changing something. And then my wife is just exasperated and just like, that's exactly what I told you. I was like, I know, but you have to hear it from somebody else sometimes.
And I think that's what happens with kids, because so often the kids are always, I'll use the term nagging. It's probably not the right word, but go do this, or you need to do whatever. But yet just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But then when you got someone else starting to tell them the same thing from outside,
right?
Oh, yeah, that does make some sense.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's important with mentors and extended family is a little bit of that coordination, with working with the kids, whether they're preteens or teenagers or even older, is sometimes that little bit of coordination on the messaging that's coming across, is because the kids will share different things with people at different times in different ways. And, sometimes moms and dads need that help with having somebody else listen to what's going on that's maybe not as close or as passionate about a situation. So I think that's probably just one of those things that everybody may know instinctively, but we rarely do that. I don't think we coordinate a whole lot with parents and with people with regards to what's going on with the kids.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think a lot of times, too, we look at kids as kids. And over the years, I've noticed I don't treat kids like kids.
No.
I treat them like people. And I'll ask their opinions. And I remember years ago, I was dating this particular lady, and her son was 16 at the time. First time I walked in the house, he was setting up a model train setup or something like that. And he was having a problem with something, and I was looking at it, and I said, well, what do you think? I didn't think anything about it. I just, it was a casual comment. Found out sometime later that he just didn't believe that some adult would ask him what his opinion was. You got to treat them like people. You got to treat them like humans. They can do a whole lot more than we think they can.
Absolutely. One of the things, too, that I know that you did with my kids, and I'm sure all the kids that came through the shop, was I think they were filling out time cards. I mean, they would, when you have 13, 14-year-old kids that have to come in and punch the clock and be responsible for, how many widgets did you process and how much time did you have at the shop?
I treat it like a real business. In fact, with one of the kids, the one that actually just left, he came on a fairly regular basis when he was 11. No, we're not talking child labor here, but it was part of their school course, and Mom loved it, and I loved it, and they loved it. So before that he would come down just to piddle, and I would give him $5 or something like that. But he was ready to do something for real on occasion. So he came in and I said, okay, you're gonna do just like your brothers do. When you come, there's going to be a timesheet, and you're going to have to fill it out.
Mm-hmm.
And we get paid every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, I'll write you a check. I got to wait 2 weeks to get my money? Yep, that's what your dad does.
Right.
And I don't take checks or credit cards. And I said, well, son, you got a problem because you're going to get a check.
Right.
Guess what? He loved getting those checks. So he had gone home and told his mom that he was going to have to wait for 2 weeks to get his money. Mom says, well, that's what Dad does, and that's what your brothers do. That's the way it is in life.
Right.
You go to work, you get a check every 2 weeks or whatever the time period is. And then we start talking about Mr. FICA on payroll checks and stuff like that. Federal tax, state tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually, get down with them and say, okay, you're making X number of dollars an hour. If you were working for a real job, you would get this taken out and that taken out and that taken out. And one of the boys in particular came back when he had his first real job. He said, Mr. Jim, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. Yeah. You start, especially when you start working those jobs where it's 10, 15 hours a week at, maybe fast food or somewhere else. And you're thinking you're making, I don't know, I'm making this up, $50. And the next thing you know, your paycheck's $35.
Right. Well, in the shop, too, for those who have been around for a while, we actually get into how business works. We got to buy materials. I got to pay you. We got to pay for the materials. We got to buy this. We got to buy that. We get X amount of money. And then we have to take all that stuff that we spent out of that, and whatever's left is what we get.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one case where we did a big run. It took a long time. And I showed them how much we got, and we very much underpriced that thing. I showed them how much we got, how much it cost me to get all that stuff done, and my money was $2 per unit. $2. I said, you guys made more money than I did. Because we get what's left over.
Right. And that's an interesting experience because even when I'm paying kids to cut the grass or do something around the house, it's, here's some money here for this and here's some money for that. The kids that came through the shop have been able to see what that real world experience is. So by the time to your point, that by the time they start getting real part-time jobs and first jobs and things like that, they've already got this concept of, hey, I'm somewhere along the cost line. There's materials, there's time, there's, lights, there's all these different costs that go into a product or a service. Labor and what they get at from a paycheck is just part of that. So, I'm sure all those kids were, and I know my sons were definitely ahead of the game, and just in terms of thinking about how a business really runs.
Oh yeah, I've seen it with them. And the good thing about that family, they come knowing how to work because, when they grew up, they had chores to do and they're taught, to value the money.
Sure.
And so most of them have saved their money. And when it came time to get their driver's license, they would buy a used car and pay cash.
Mm-hmm.
None of this credit stuff. Just don't do that. So.
Well, and from being just up the street, our youngest son, Steven, had bought that pickup truck, that old rusted pickup truck that he had to go, I think, 3 counties away to grab it and bring it back. And,
I remember that.
Oh, geez. That thing stayed parked more times than he was driving it. But the thing is that, that was his, and that was money saved, and that was, some of it from the shop and some of it from other places. But that was his, and so that was an important lesson too. Is that
absolutely? I don't agree with parents giving their 16-year-old a brand new car. I just don't.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't even get a brand new car.
Right. The kid has to have skin in the game.
Well, Jim, I appreciate your time and talking to me about this mentor role. And one of the items that I like to do as I wrap up these conversations is ask the guests a favorite story that they have of their grandfather or grandfathers, or an experience that they've got that's particularly memorable as far as being a mentor or grandfather themselves. And so if you have a story or something that you would like to share, I'd love to hear it.
Not really. I knew that question was coming, too. My grandfather worked in the coal mines in western Pennsylvania, hard worker, but then I just found out recently he had a heart attack. I wondered why he didn't work. This was back in the 50s and 60s. But boy, could he cook. And he would plant a garden, and oh my goodness, the stuff he planted. It was good stuff.
Yeah.
But most of my memories from that point of view, not really a grandfather, but Uncle Boyd is where most of my memories come from growing up and working with another adult.
Well, thank you for sharing those with us. I really appreciate it, and have really appreciated learning more about your experience with being a mentor and working with these kids and all the experiences and wisdom that you have to share with us. So,
well, it sure wasn't planned, but it sure has developed over the years, especially the last 20.
Sometimes those are the best ways that they come about. Sometimes if you plan these things out, it just never works right.
Well, I expect to get married and have 1 million kids. Neither one ever happened, so I adopt everybody else's kids, so I probably do have 1 million kids.
You certainly have a lot, that's for sure. Well, Jim, thank you again for spending this time with me and sharing these experiences. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.